Kia ora iwi and welcome to 30 with me, Guyon Espiner. We do 30 minutes with one guest and no cut, so what we record is what you get. Dame Julie Christie, she's known as the Queen of Reality TV. She was awarded legend status at the New Zealand Television Awards last year, recognising the huge success of shows such as Treasure Island, Game of Two Halves and The Block. But this is an international story, less about making New Zealand television, more about making television in New Zealand for the world, as her company Touchdown Productions became the leading exporter of program formats. She's had her critics. The journalist Simon Wilson once called her a cultural vandal, and her time at MediaWorks saw controversial changes to current affairs at TV3, including the axing of John Campbell's show Campbell Live. She grew up in poverty in Greymouth and worked for a decade in journalism before her multi-million-dollar reality TV success. So what's next for Julie Christie? And what are her tips for surviving the media apocalypse? Let's start the clock. 30 minutes with Julie Christie. Dame Julie Christie, welcome to 30.
Thank you, Guyon, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you in the studio. Let's start with what you're doing now, because you bought the old Natural History Unit, as they used to call it,
Yes,
I think
right.
in 2021.
Yeah.
You renamed it NHNZ Worldwide, and you're making everything from poi stories about the lives of black ferns to nature documentaries for National Geographic.
Well, NHNZ is the oldest production company in the country. It was started in the 70s by TVNZ. It was the Natural History Unit. And then they sold it to Fox. So it was owned by Fox out of the US for many, many years. And by the time I bought it, it had been Canadian-owned for a few years. I loved the idea that they were able to make television in New Zealand for the world. You know, at that stage, I'd spent a lot of time overseas. I wanted to be able to work in New Zealand but not deal with the constraints of New Zealand budgets. So, you know, it had a great reputation in natural history. To be fair, I didn't buy it at its high point. I bought it at its lower points. But now we're doing a lot of sport, we're doing a lot of true crime, as well as some natural history. So,
just wanted to touch on one of the shows you got coming up, Forever Auckland FC.
Yes.
It sounds really interesting about the rise of Auckland professional football team.
Yes.
You've got some interesting investors there, haven't you? Bill Foley, the American billionaire,
Yes.
and Anna Mowbray, who New Zealanders will know, obviously.
Ellie Williams, yeah.
So is this a sort of all-access doco? Is it?
Yes, it's a docu-series. It's 8.5 hours, and for Sky Open. It's been remarkable for me, having worked in sport for so many, many years. Right back when I was a journalist, I worked in sport. And I think that the difference with this show is the access is true and real. Steve Corica wore that mic through every game. And they have just decided to embrace their fans. I feel like they thought we owe it to our fans to be truthful, to be open. And as a result, we've got a raw roller coaster of a wonderful story that just happened to be brilliant by the time they got to the plate final. And you know, there was a lot of expensive shows out there you judge yourself by, like, you know, is it Drive to Survive? Is it Welcome to Wrexham? Well, it's
I was going to mention
neither.
Welcome to Wrexham. There's a couple of American actors. I think Ryan Reynolds is one of them.
Yeah,
and they
yeah.
buy this sort of struggling
and
football
they go
team.
there twice, and now they're in their fourth series.
Yeah. So I get a bit of vibes from that, and a bit of Ted Lasso vibes, maybe.
Yeah, well, I mean, we have our own Rebecca and Anna Mowbray, don't we? You know, and I loved Ted Lasso. I absolutely loved Ted Lasso. I think that what you see is a different New Zealand. You see a very different New Zealand with Auckland FC.
So when will people see that? When's it coming out?
I don't. They announced it later this year, very soon, I think. But yeah, it's exciting to see real sports access like we've never had in this country. Because when you say all access, you should actually be giving all access, and they do.
It's not. You don't get that with the All Blacks, do you?
I have been working in rugby for a long time, and to be fair, no.
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 I'm really interested in this idea of making television in New Zealand for the world, which is what you've done. I mean, if you go to something like The Chair that you made, I think that sold into... So just for people who don't remember...
29 countries, yes. Yeah. So,
and that was with the heart monitor, and if you start freaking out, you lose your money and things. And you had John McEnroe, I think, host the US one.
John McEnroe hosted the US and the UK versions. It sold to 29 countries. That was really based around, you know how things trigger different things in your life. And I was thinking, people started talking about the dumbing down of television. I think The Bachelor just became a hit in America. And I asked a scientist, I said, so what happens? Can we monitor brain to show that quiz shows and game shows are actually not dumb? And he said, well, actually, it's as simple as this. Your heart shows everything. So just put a heart monitor on someone, it'll show you everything. So obviously, when you can't answer the question, your heart starts going off and then your money starts going backwards. So it was a simple premise, and it did very well for a few years. But what it did is it put our name on the map.
How hard is it to make television in New Zealand for the world? I mean, do we just need to broaden our horizons in New Zealand?
It's always hard because, like, we made Auckland Forever Auckland FC with one cameraman, no sound, one cameraman, one-man band, no producer. He was with the team all the time. You look at Drive to Survive, which has got at least 100 crews, right? And so you see money-wise, it's very difficult. But what I've concentrated on was making formats. So you make a version here, and then you go to America and you spend 20 times as much money to make the same show, but with different people. So that's how I started my business and made my business, all based around formats. We made Treasure Island in New Zealand, Australia and Ireland. And so that was the business. Here, we're struggling because of our funding model is such that the number one thing you have to get funded by New Zealand Audio is you have to reflect our cultural identity. Now, what is our cultural identity now? If you go to Auckland FC, it's very different. There's 20 immigrant families within one team. So I think that we have to really open up about what we think our culture is, and we can look to Australia and go, they've managed to monetize theirs. They are... So
is this the only way, and we'll talk about the media as well a bit later on, but is this the only way really that you can see the TV industry surviving? Because you say it's in real trouble, right?
Oh, it's in terrible trouble because there's just no more money and the government has got other priorities. You can stand around and whine or do silly things like threatening Netflix if you don't make more local productions, then we'll turn you off in this country. Well, you can imagine the public reaction to that. That was a really silly idea.
Do you think Netflix would pull the plug?
Of course they would. Of course they would.
Because Australia has tried that, hasn't it?
Yeah, and it didn't work. And yet I see it in a culture and heritage paper as a possible thing to do.
Well, Sparta is saying we should.
Such a silly thing to do.
Do you think so?
Well, there's no chance of it happening. Let's instead look at why Netflix isn't making more shows in this country.
Well, just to be fair to Sparta, they're saying we should put a levy on, like a small levy on, and then we could get some revenue that could be then be reintroduced. You think that's unrealistic?
And
as well?
Who's going to decide what's made with that revenue? Netflix. Or who's going? I just don't I think it's something's been tried before. I don't think it will work. It's our small population. It's really difficult. What I think we can do is look at what's working on Netflix. Obviously, documentary is huge. Now, I should say now I come from a very much an unscripted background, so I'm not talking about drama and things like that. But in the world of factual, unscripted documentary, I don't like calling it reality. I always call it unscripted. We need to up our game. Like true crime is the biggest genre in the world. We have 2 true crime series at the moment, one in development and one in production. It is the biggest genre, and we're not making it because you can't get it publicly funded usually. So as a result, we're not making what the world wants, and we should be, because we're an English-speaking country. The demand for English-speaking content is almost endless. And yet we're not selling nearly enough. We're belly gazing basically, and we're not thinking. We don't think, okay, if I adjust this show by 20%, I might get noticed. I might be able to sell it. It might become of interest to Australia or to a smaller channel in America, and that would be my little break. And then they'll want something else of mine. That's how I started. One little idea with a documentary with Mark Ellis in Middlemarch near Dunedin, and it snowballed. That one thing gave me the break. So instead we're kind of like, we're so desperate to get any form of funding that we've become too inward looking.
So do you think that New Zealand on air should change and adjust its settings to allow more freedom to try to produce this sort of content?
Well, there should be a massive tick if you've got international viability in anything. And even if you sell, between our exchange rate, the lesser cost of our crews, and our screen production rebates, it is less than half the cost to make shows here than most places in the world. And we should be taking huge advantage of that while creating our own IP. At the moment, we're bringing in Hollywood movies, but you don't know they're in New Zealand. They just spend money and they disappear. I'm talking about creating things we own. And like there's a show on Netflix called Low on the Spectrum, which is about, kids with autism. I think they're in about their 8th series. That's an Australian show. And it's beautiful. So the Australians, especially in the last few years, have really managed to commercialise being Australian for the international audience.
Well, that's interesting you say that. So you're not saying that we have to lose cultural distinctiveness.
Oh, no.
You're saying that we can commercialise that because people are still interested. I mean, if you look at stories like way back, Once Were Warriors or The Piano or whatever it is.
Why are we going so far back, Guyon? Because we haven't had that success recently. I mean, Kevin and Co have done, I think they've taken the spelling bee to Australia, which is fantastic. Guy Montgomery's spelling bee. But generally, it was pop stars, it was Treasure Island, The Chair. In the early 2000s, we were leading the world in creating formats along with the Netherlands. Now we just don't do it because we're all scrambling to get that little bit of New Zealand on our money. And, shows like Treasure Island, isn't it bizarre that now to be a comedian in this country, you've got to do Treasure Island? Have you noticed that every comedian gets established? It's just astonishing. It's taken a lot of snobbery out of people like Simon Wilson, probably. Sorry, Simon, you've got to do one of my shows.
Let's go back a bit and look at where you came from. I know you're sick of telling this story, but the poor girl from Greymouth made good story. But it's a true story and it's fascinating. Your dad dies when you were, 5? Your mum's 32. She's got, 7 kids under 12. She's on a widow's benefit and sees education as the only way out. And a fear of poverty is your fuel to success. Have I got that pretty much pretty close?
That's pretty true. Yeah, it's very true, especially about my mother and education. I mean, she was... What was it? Were the days of spare the rod and spoil the child or whatever? Mum used to, she was good with a hearth brush. So you did your homework, you achieved at school, because there was a little bit of fear of, Mum giving you a whack round the backside. But she did see enormous value in education. She herself was, she got 5 subjects in school certificate at a time when you had to get all 5, when virtually no girls did. So she was, and she worked in the Blackpool mines actually at the beginning of the Labour Party way back then. And she was very determined about education. Mum didn't think it was our way out. Mum would have been just as happy for someone to become a motor mechanic or a carpenter, something useful. But she wanted us all to have those choices, and that worked. I mean, for me, I ended up going to journalism school, truth being it was only 1 year and I only wanted to be poor for a year.
Yeah, you went to Wellington I did the same course, actually.
Did you really?
Wellington Polytech, yeah.
You're probably a few
I think you did a little bit better than me, though.
Did I?
Well,
oh, you know what? I was only 17 and I graduated the day of the Erebus disaster.
Wow.
Yeah, I'll never forget that night. Yeah, but
it's interesting because you went into being a sub-editor. I mean,
I did.
And I wonder whether writing headlines, that's the bit that sucks you into the story, right? So
writing headlines has been amazing from television. Like writing titles on shows and that. And only when the Auckland Sun got closed down. I always worked on the London Sun too. Which was the biggest tabloid in the world. I worked in the sports department, sport and racing there, and on the Daily Mail.
Was that fun?
Well, it was really well paid.
Was it?
If I stayed back next to 4 hours and did the Greyhound results, I doubled my shift. It was like...
Yeah, they love their expenses over there too, don't they?
It was fabulous. And I was the only female, of course, and it was actually good fun. And Calvin McKenzie was the editor. And Rupert Murdoch was on the newsroom floor all the time. He loved those newspapers. So that was, to me, I learnt so much about how to tell a story succinctly, because sub-editors in English newspapers are...
There's some classic headlines.
Oh, gotcha. Remember the Falklands War? You probably don't remember.
I do remember. I do remember that.
They were great headlines. But, those sort of experiences are very good. I also got into Teachers College, and I often say, thank heavens I never tried teaching. I wouldn't have had the patience for it. But, journalism, learning to write was a great advantage when you came to television because it's our most missing skill.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the media because, wow, that's under threat at the moment too, isn't it? I mean, you've had considerable experience in the media, not only 10 years in journalism, but you went on the Media Works board and for I think 4 years between 2013 to 2017?
I did, yes, yeah.
Gee, I mean, it's changed even since then, hasn't it? And the changes that Media Works made at the time were controversial and people said...
Oh, the birth of News Hub, the birth of the project. That was all our board. They were, but the interesting thing about boards and what I learned in many ways, I've been on many boards. My first one was NZTE, and then I was on the board of the 2011 Rugby World Cup, and my last one, I chaired the Women's Rugby World Cup in 2022. So by that stage, I decided to give up boards. But I think, when I read how media deals with boards, and including this current controversy around, NZME, when you're on a board, you have to act in the best interest of the shareholder. That's your primary.
It's a fiduciary responsibility, isn't it?
Absolutely, and people forget that, especially journalists, to be fair. And there's certainly I don't think one journalist in the MediaWorks newsroom ever thought about the fact that the board, was pretty much having to act in the best interest of the shareholder. And I think that's quite often difficult when people look at boards from the outside. But personally, I'm a bit much of a doer for boards, and so that's why I kind of gave up a lot of governance.
Sure, okay.
To do stuff.
I'm interested though in your views on the media and on the business model and on the future of the media. I mean, how do you see it? Because it feels like it's in a fairly dire state. I mean, we've seen big cuts at TVNZ.
Yeah.
As you say, News Hub does survive on stuff, but this is an industry under real threat and real challenge. How do you see it?
It's I see there's got to be a huge amount more consolidation. People have got to work together. I know Radio New Zealand's moving with TVNZ into the same building. Thank heavens, fabulous. You'll both get stronger for it, and I think that's great. And personally, on my news, I love the maturity. I like the maturity in reporters in that. And, I'm a big CNN watcher because I like their reporters and I like the straight talking nature of their reporters. So I think what's happened to our news now, and the feedback I get, is that the reporters have got so young and there's a real credibility issue. And that's...
You like to see some grey hair?
I'd like a lot more grey hair. You're right. And,
I think between the two of us...
It's true, but Anderson Cooper forever. But I think there'd be a lot more consolidation. The fact is that Meta has pretty much destroyed it all. We all see how harassed we are on any form of social media. I look at things on Facebook once. Only started on there to spy on my children originally, but you get inundated with ads. You know where the money's going. The money's going there, so the money is not going here.
Would you is it possible to do your Make It in New Zealand for the world in the media to some degree as well? I mean, we did used to see that. We used to have more of an international outlook, didn't we?
Very much. Very, very much. And I think that was largely driven by TVNZ too. TVNZ used to be a major player. It's very hard, because when you have an international owner, you presume that might make things better. But actually, if you've got an international owner, chances are they're looking for greater profits than a small country can provide. So that doesn't usually work either. Big international media companies don't come into countries to make the media better. They come in, for various reasons, whether it's to use their content somewhere else or whether it's to, it's wanting to own something which doesn't cost them much to own. But I think you've got to start working more and more together. And I think we will inevitably see that. I look at things like, having regional reporters in the regions, could there be an NZPA, the old NZPA version of,
yes, a wire service.
A wire service in the regions that everybody taps into. Same when I look at the cost, must be of having LA reporters, reporters in London. But it doesn't change the model of where is the income coming from in the future? And that's the really hard thing. And that's why probably, the media is going to have to work seriously hard on its credibility. And that really comes down to, is this opinion? And if it is, Herald, it needs to say it is, or is this genuine reporting? And I think once they sort that out a little better, we might see a new bit of faith in particularly the print media.
Because the loss of trust is a serious issue for us in the media, isn't it?
It's huge. It really is. And I think people underestimate it. And you think, you think, oh, that's just old people, but I'm 63, right? And so I'm now in the older demographic. The older demographic is very educated now. We're a very different, we think differently. And so you can't say, oh, only old people watch One News. It's simply not true. you know. So I think that we've got to get that, you've got to get that balance between opinion and straight reporting. And even in politics in particular, I see it now, and sometimes I go, wow, you know, it's really, it's very tough.
I want to talk a little bit about reality TV, or unscripted TV as you call it, and the cultural and even political change that that has delivered. I mean, we now have a reality TV star as the President of the United States, don't we? I mean, Mark Burnett, who did The Apprentice.
Yeah.
Now he was a real driver of reality TV.
He was. We were around
right?
at the same time. In fact, he talked about me in his book.
Okay, yeah.
He's
So you're perfect to talk about this.
yeah. No, I think
Please do.
I think, well, obviously Donald Trump wasn't mostly a reality TV star. It just appealed to his vanities, and he, you know, being fronting an American show, he could get away with whatever he liked, I gather. Though I think everybody ever worked on that is under an incredibly tight NDA. You don't hear many people talk about it. You know what reality TV is? Reality TV is actually real people, especially in this country. And the great thing about American unscripted TV is Americans tend to voice their thoughts. We are much more reserved, right? So, you know, Americans will tell you what they're going to do. They'll tell you they're doing it, and then they'll tell you they did it. So they voice their thoughts. So they're perfect because you get 3 times as much emotion on any situation. So is it real? Yes, it is real. Are the situations put in front of them real? Well, they just put hurdles in front of them. And I'm sure the Kardashians sit down twice a week on their sofa, and then the producer says, right, what if she did that to you? What would you do? So their reactions are real, but the scenarios put in front of them aren't. And I think that is how it has grown enormously. Look at Married at First Sight, the most controversial and one of the biggest in the world. The biggest in the world is Love Island, which we don't have here, or we don't have a local version of. But Married at First Sight, 3 years of counselling now for those contestants after they come off that show.
Really?
Yeah, that's what they have to have now. Well, that's what they get offered. So for me, it's...
What do you think about that?
I couldn't make the show because I would find it very hard now to deal with what I suspect probably you have to deal with off screen with those people. Because no matter how many times you show those sort of shows, people still believe there's something different. I mean, surely no one now goes on a show like that and doesn't know what's going to happen. It gets edited. Yeah, it gets edited. And so, but people still appear to break their heart on those shows. So I would find that hard to deal with these days.
What, are we softer now? Is it?
Oh, way softer. Why do you think I bought a company that specialised in animals?
Because you didn't want to work with children?
I made a kids show. Year one. It was an animated pandering Kiwi. Watch it on TVNZ Plus.
But I suppose this brings us to the real tension, doesn't it, between, and I mentioned in the intro that Simon Wilson once called you a cultural vandal, but you've had, I mean, obviously there are critics to reality TV, but I guess it's whether or not you see television and screen as just escape, or whether there should be a higher purpose.
Yeah. Oh, and you're right. You know, I chose to make entertainment because that's what the world wanted. I was always focused on what does the world want. The world wanted entertainment. I made many years of This Is Your Life. Now, This Is Your Life is a perfect example of how entertainment and information can meet.
So it doesn't have to be either or.
Oh, it does, and it wasn't for many years. You know, like there are many, many great examples. Still now, look at Country Calendar. There are the best information TV is also entertaining. The problem is some people still believe I should come home from my work, you know, sit down on my couch and get preached at, instead of most people want to escape. That's why they watch. And that's why Treasure Island is so huge. They think, oh, how would I react if I got lost on a deserted island, which is never a deserted island now. I think was it in Tiana or somewhere else? But, you know, that's what, you know, people want that escapism. Otherwise, they wouldn't be watching these shows. So, yeah.
Because you actually once said that, I think this was in a listener profile back in 2006.
Gosh, did I?
I pretty much decided that I was going to become a major commercial success, so I didn't have to be a critical success.
Yeah. I took a lot of criticism, particularly from the print media. I think there was a There was a Jane Barron headline in the Evening Post which said, "Crap TV, thy name is Julie Christie," or something, you know.
That stung?
It stung, actually. It's probably the last time I got stung, but it did sting because I went to see a PR person called Jenny Rainish, and she said to me, "You're wasting your time." She said, "Unless you get run over by a bus, they're not going to say anything nice about you. So why don't you just go offshore and do..." She said she told the same thing to Michael Fay, interestingly, after America's Cup. She said, "Why don't you just go offshore and prove them wrong?" And off I went. So
Do you think
that was the pivotal point in my career.
was it?
Yeah, because that's what I did. I thought, you know what? And I did. And to this day, you know, unscripted television in the States doesn't get anything like the bagging that it gets in this country.
Do you think there's still a snobbery about it in New Zealand? Probably less so, eh? Do you think?
Did you listen to your intro?
No,
Not now. Well, it's not a snobbery that affects me. I'm not affected by it. I'm not affected by it now, you know. But at the same time, I'm really proud of, you know, I made a shark show, then I made a paranormal show with Jack Osborne, you know, from the Osmond. Like, we make so much. All those years of This Is Your Life, the hardest show in the world to make. You know, I've done so much great stuff, you know. We've just done Dynamic Planet, which is a multi-award winning climate crisis series. You know, we've actually got, you know, a show in production for Netflix, which I don't think anyone else in this country has. So, like, I'm pretty pleased to be for what, you know, for how we've gone and how that success of one or two small shows has enabled me to make other things.
So you got your mojo back in TV now, because you left it nearly for a decade, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I tried governance. I was quite burnt out, I guess, by the time I left it. But it wasn't about being criticised to that. It was just, I'd sold my company. I'd stayed for 5 years, and it's very hard working for international owners.
Yes, because you sold Touchdown
I
Productions.
told Touchdown to iWorks, who were Dutch, and then they sold it to Warner Brothers. It's very hard. You spend so much time worrying about forecasting for next year, but how do you forecast in this country when you don't know? When you're running to New Zealand on air every 2 months and hoping, you can't forecast. So it's very hard.
Let's talk a little bit more about the local film and television industry in the last 5 minutes or so. I mean, the government has just extended those rebates, and we
Really
spend
important.
about $1 billion we're going to spend over the next 4 years. So it's big
it
money.
is.
That working?
It's working in bringing film production into New Zealand. And so what does that do? That provides jobs. The problem is that is working for wages. You know, you are working for wages with those big Hollywood productions. And people are getting upskilled and all that. That's true. I'm sure there's at least 10 companies which have come out of people who worked at Weta, which has been amazing for New Zealand. But when it comes to creating value, creating companies, creating IP in this country, we're not doing nearly as well as we should be.
And that doesn't help in that regard, does it?
That's original New Zealand production. Well, it does, because technically you can get up to 40% if it's your original IP. But to get to a level of $250 an hour spend, which qualifying spend, you're never going to get that out of a New Zealand broadcaster now. And so where are you going to get that money? You've got to try and get it offshore. So if we thought more about what offshore wants all round, whether it be, you know, the television networks, New Zealand On Air, and all together said, you know what, let's favour projects which have, you know, might be able to sell overseas, we'd be a lot better off.
We saw The Block. We've seen other reality TV shows go south recently. I mean, is reality
really
TV in real trouble in New Zealand?
The cost.
You don't think it's changing taste? Is it?
No, not at all. I mean, the numbers on Treasure Island are phenomenal. I don't know if that's getting made anymore. All those big shows are simply too expensive to make for the broadcasters, and they don't get New Zealand On Air funding. And I think it's a debate whether they necessarily should, especially when they're overseas. I mean, all those shows, the only one with New Zealand IP is Treasure. You know, Traitors, The Block, they're all overseas IP. You know, they're all formats brought in from overseas. So because they suddenly, you know, when shows are 250, 300,000, maybe 350 an hour, the broadcasters can't afford them anymore. And that's going to be one of the tragics, is that we're not going to see anymore. I mean, how are comedians in New Zealand going to get famous if they don't win Treasure Island?
Hey, what are you most proud of? There are so many shows.
Oh, gosh. You know, the damehood for my mother. That was services to governance and television. You know, there are a lot of little shows I'm really proud of. I'm incredibly proud of Forever Auckland FC, just because it's funny, it's raw, it's real. They were an absolute delight to work with. So, you know, I'm not much of a belly gazer. I don't really look a lot into the past. There was some wonderful This Is Your Lives reproduced. And that's another format which is too expensive to make now. I've pitched it and pitched it again. But no one, and it's a real pity because that was a great format, you know, American-owned format, but fabulous. So I'll just stick with the last one. Forever Auckland FC, Save from a Shark on Disney Plus, which I actually directed myself, a shark show. So, you know, it's...
And what's next? I mean, your brother Leo Malloy had a tilt at politics, so standing for the Auckland Mayoralty.
Do you know how many times I've been asked a lot of times to stand for the Mayoralty?
Is politics something you'd consider?
No. It's, you know what? I gave up governance because I felt like I was too much of a doer. Imagine being the Mayor of Auckland. You actually have no power. You're one vote. So what can you change, really? I'm just always trying to get my friend Paula Bennett to run. She'd be fabulous. In fact, I had this conversation with her just last week. She said, what about you? And I'm like, no, what about you? So, yeah, it's to me, there's too much thankless work. It's not that I don't have the energy for it. There's too much thankless work. And the system isn't quite right. Like, they need a deciding vote.
So you're happy to keep making television?
I'm like, well, yeah, we'll see.
Thank you very much for joining us on 30.
Oh, thank you. I've enjoyed it.
Really appreciate your time. That was 30 Minutes with Dame Julie Christie. This is 30 with me, Guyon Espiner. We'll catch you next time.